Welcome to the second session in the series. In this session, we will discuss about Java collections and the most popular interview questions which come in that area. So let's start with the first question. What is the difference between ArrayList and array? This is usually the first question which is usually asked whenever the interviewer starts with Java collections, right? So let's get on with the answer. So array holds both primitive type as well as objects. And you cannot insert an element into an array, because array you have to make way for that element and then put that element there, right? So it's a complex process in an array. Third is array has fixed size. You cannot increase or decrease the size of an array. Fourth is accessing an array is faster because you can directly go to an index and pick the element and come. But when you look at an array list, it's exactly the opposite of each of these, right? So in array list, you can store objects. You cannot store primitive data types. Even if you try to store primitive data types, it will actually convert that to a wrapper class object and then store it in an array list. Second, array list occupies more space than array for the same number of elements, because array list has to store the next element's reference, right? Internally, you don't do it. Array list automatically does. So it takes up more space. Array list is not static. It can grow. This is a big advantage of array list over array. Fourth is in array list, you can add an element, insert an element in between based on position, right? That's a big advantage of array list, because array list, when you look at it, for an array, you have to shift the elements and then insert an element at a particular slot. But in array list, you can insert an element directly, right? That's the big advantage of array list. Array list is a little slower compared to an array. So this is why both have advantages and disadvantages when you compare array and array list. But you have to evaluate the problem at hand and then take a decision based on it. As I mentioned in the last video as well, this interview session, right, this video is about how do you respond back in an interview for a question. This video is not about explaining the concept. It directly gets into how would you respond back verbatim to an interviewer. That's going to be the focus of the video. So that's why you would find that there is no greater detail about concepts going into videos, pictures and all these things. Directly the response is given in the next slide. So let's get on with the process. What is the difference between vector and array list? So when you look at it, the most important factor between a vector and an array list, the difference is vector is synchronized, array list is not synchronized. What does it mean? In vector, it works well in multi-threaded environment as well. So the data structure is intact. There is nothing which goes wrong. Even in multiple threads access a vector at the same time. So it is synchronized. So it allows only one thread to update the data structure at any point of time. But in an array list, it is not synchronized. So if multiple threads are accessing an array list at the same time, adding and deleting elements into the array list, definitely the data structure can go out of place, right? It might go whack. So that's the problem in an array list. Given that an array list is not synchronized, it is faster when compared to an vector. But when you're looking at a multi-threaded environment, vector is the way to go. If you're looking at a single-threaded environment, array list is the way to go. Question number 3, what is a map interface? A map interface is used to store the key value pair. Whenever you have this object has so many elements, whenever it has a key and a value, you go for a map interface. What are the different types of maps supported in Java? Java supports tree map, hash map, linked hash map. Hash map is the one which is an implementation of a hash table, which is the fastest one. Tree map is sorted, so it uses a tree internally to establish the map. Linked hash map is a hash map which uses also a linked list. So it maintains the insertion order, the order in which the data elements are inserted, that is maintained in a linked hash map. What are synchronized and collections framework? The word synchronized means even in a multi-threaded environment, that collections framework will not crash. It will not have haphazard data. That's what is synchronized. But obviously when you say synchronized, it is slower than the non-synchronized version of it. So in Java, the synchronized collections framework are hash table, synchronized queue and vector. What is the difference between iterator and list iterator? Iterator can move only in the forward direction. Iterator traverses the framework only in the forward direction. A list iterator can traverse the data structure in both the forward as well as backward direction. What is the advantage of generics? Generics helps in strong type checking even during the compilation process. It avoids the need for typecasting. What is the use of comparable and comparator interfaces? When collections.sort is used, comparable and comparator interfaces are used. This is for the natural order of sorting. But whenever there is an object involved, at that time we have to specify as to how that sorting has to be done. Based on which field. You might have multiple fields. One could be integer, one could be date. So in an object. So at that time it is required to specify which field is the one based on which we are going to do the collections.sort. That's when comparable, compare to, comparator interfaces become very critical. What is the difference between list and set interfaces? List interface allows duplicate values to be there. Set interface does not allow duplicate values to be there in the set. List interface maintains the insertion order. Set interface does not maintain the insertion order. List interface allows multiple null values to be there. Set interface allows only one null value to be there in that set. These are the differences between list and set interfaces. When and why do we override the equals method? Equals method is overridden when you have to compare two objects. If you have an object for an employee and you have three fields, name, employee ID and age. If you want to compare if two employees are the same, you might not compare with the name or the age. You might look at their employee ID to see if both these represent the same employee. That's when equals method is over. What is the difference between stack and queue collections? Stack actually is the stack implementation which supports push, pop and peek methods. Queue is the implementation of queue functionality which is enqueue, dequeue, poll functions. So both stack and queue are not synchronous, so they are not thread safe. Stack implements LIFO, which is last element in is the first element out. Queue implements first, whichever is the element which is in is the first element that gets out. How do you reverse a linked list using collections? There is a method collections.reverse. So if you pass the linked list reference to the collections.reverse method, it will reverse the linked list. What is the difference between comparable and comparator? Comparable uses the natural order for sorting. Comparator uses the user-defined custom order for sorting. Comparable has one single interface called compare to. Comparator has two major methods. One is equals, one is compare. These are two methods which are available within the comparator class. When you use comparable, the actual values are modified, right? So the order, if you do a sort, it is modified. In a comparator, it doesn't modify the elements in the actual class. So these are the differences between comparable and comparator.